thinking through the logic of Tesla's special generator, it's, how do we take an electrostatic field and convert it into current? It's really quite simple when you think about it. Self-inductance is the geometry of the coil. We know this. When you calculate the self-inductance of a coil, you have to put in the parameters of the formation of your coil, which involve its diameter, the number of turns, etc., etc. And when you're dealing now with diameters of the coil, you're dealing with the shape, which is simple geometry. And it has nothing to do with anything exotic like capacitance or inductance. It's just geometry. Now that diameter of the coil defines its space inside the coil, up to and including the coil, which defines the limit of mutual inductance. Now, mutual inductance is a percentage between coils. And the interior space up to the limit of the boundary of that space defined by the geometry of the coil, that goes up to 100% and never reaches 100% because of the imperfections of the medium in which the magnetism is going to be transferred from one coil to the other. It goes up to 100% as a potential limit, but it never really reaches there. So even if you use iron, it never really reaches there. Especially if you don't use iron, if you use air, it certainly doesn't reach there. But that's the limit, but it's defined by the geometry. The minute you go outside the coil, you go outside the definition of the coil, because the definition of the coil includes its diameter. Once you expand, go beyond that limitation of the diameter of the coil, you no longer have a limitation to the percentage of transfer between the coils. And once you go above 100%, now you're multiplying the current, because isn't magnetism and current are reflections of each other, like looking in a mirror? They're reflections of each other. They're translatable, one into the other and back from the other, back into the first, into the one. So they're taken to be equivalent for all intents and purposes, but it's the efficiency of translation between the two that we're worried about. And if we can take the translation efficiency above 100%, now we've got over unity, and we don't even have an exterior voltage source or an exterior current source contributing to the circuit. All we have is the efficiency of transfer based on simple geometry. So when you've got massive iron outside the space defined by a coil, and it's outside, but it's magnetically coupled to the core that's in the coil, now you've got additional transfer medium above 100%. Way beyond. Now it's not efficient, so like Tesla said, you have to have 200 pounds of iron to add 1 horsepower. So, but you apply voltage, yet the outcome is current, and the combined effect is watts, horsepower. All because you went beyond the boundaries of the coil. Because it's fair game. Anything outside the coil is fair game. And it's not definable what the limit is as to what you can achieve. Because for all intents and purposes, space goes on indefinitely. So you can add as much magnetizable iron as you like outside the diameter of that coil. Or the pair of coils, that you're mutually coupling. So the logic behind William Lyne's citation or quotation of Nikola Tesla is valid. Just the logic alone. Even if we don't have evidence, even if we don't have physicists telling us what to do and what not to do, doesn't matter. The logic is sound. Simple, you just have to think it through, that's all. It's simple geometry. What is self-inductance? What is mutual inductance? What are our actual limitations of mutual inductance? What are they? The reason why I bring this up is because what initially got me the aha moment was when I realized that what the Amman brothers did was essentially what Nikola Tesla, the Germans did with their electro U-boats, in which the Amman brothers had a steel drum surrounding the coil. So they had steel on the outside, as well as probably on the inside of the core of their coil or coils on the inside of that drum. And so they were doing what was necessary to raise the mutual coupling beyond unity by having steel surrounding the coil magnetically coupled to this iron that was probably on the interior of those coils or coil. And that is one of the clues they give us. The newspaper reporter man asked them, what's going on in there, and as much as he managed to divulge, he said wire was one factor, iron was a second factor they admitted to, and a mineral of some kind was a third. And it's that admission of the use of iron that at first we might think, oh, it's not very interesting, but how you use the iron makes all the difference in the world. So that was what really convinced me that this notion of William Lyne quoting Nikola Tesla is not just a silly notion, and it makes all the difference in the world, because now you can get a performance that you wouldn't get otherwise out of the mutual inductance between coils. So what gauge wire is in that coil? I don't know. Probably, I don't know. Maybe it's got to be a stout girth, a low gauge number. My thinking being not because we're trying to create a voltage field by having a thin gauge wire, but because we're trying to pick up the magnetic field surrounding the coil that the steel shell of the drum is kind of reflecting back to the coil, or holding it there in the space surrounding the coil. And so in order to pick up on it adequately, we don't want much resistance in the wire of that coil. So that might give rationalization for using stout wire. But to create the voltage field that will induce the magnetism in that steel mass would take a coil of a very thin wire winding, of lots of windings, a very long wire, in order to create the high voltage necessary to create that electrostatic field, if all you're doing is using a simple coil. But in this circuit that I've been developing, that's not needed. So then you can switch to a stout girth in order to pick up the magnetism coming from the mass of steel or iron surrounding the circuit. Okay?